right. There we go. All right. So, good evening, everyone. As always, thank you for joining us for another fireside chat. This evening we have Angel Garten joining us. So, if you would like to start off with a brief introduction for yourself.
Thank you so much. Samara, is that how I pronounce your name? Samara?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I appreciate people even being here to listen. That means a lot. Yeah, my name is Angel. You can call me Ang as well. It's what my friends call me. And I am a creative strategist, or really the only creative strategist at Square Enix of America. And if you're wondering, okay, what exactly does a creative strategist do? Don't worry, it's actually a very rare title to have on the development side. It's typically a title that lives on the agency side of things, an advertisement agency side. To explain what a creative strategist is and why I think it's important for the games industry to consider having, especially maybe medium sized or larger teams, I'll explain where my background comes from. It's very strange, it's very eclectic. So, actually, I started as a graphic designer initially. I worked in Florida on very boring things like restaurants and like train companies, like big boring companies that I did design for. And as I sort of built my own company and my own base of clients, and as I collaborated with other graphic designers, I realized I'm actually not that good of a designer, and I think I'm a lot more skilled at communicating with the clients and determining their needs and coming up with a plan and how to approach how to achieve their goals, right? That sort of turned into like general marketing and social media work. And that's where I lived until I stepped into the games industry. I always knew I wanted to work in games. I just wasn't always sure exactly how I would do that. A long time ago, I wanted to write music for games. We all know how hard that is. So I ended up in social media on the kind of the indie side, and that's where my career started. But as I kind of grew my like marketing and general like social experience, I fell into social strategy. And strategy really is, I think, where the games industry has a really big opportunity. And I think it's also one of the least understood disciplines too. It's like this 2,000 foot view, right? Where you're looking overall at how you're dueling out the messaging for your game and how that's being experienced by the consumer. It requires a lot of cultural knowledge. It requires a lot of industry knowledge. Essentially, I finally get to make use of the lifetime of sitting in my room and just marathoning games that I've been doing since I was like 6 years old. And having this understanding of social media, I used to be the social strategist for the Sims accounts, particularly the Sims TikTok at launch. So if you've seen any of the Sims humor, you can maybe understand me a little bit through that. I also worked on, oh, actually funny, the first creative strategy I really ever did that I led myself is now finally being actioned. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. If you're seeing that out, that's not fully my strategy. I worked on it about 3 years ago, and a lot has changed. But that was my first creative strategy that I ever did, among a few other things that did succeed and did not succeed. So through this conversation, I hope to kind of explain a little bit more about how creative strategy is important in branding a game, because it all ties together. I hope that made sense.
It did, and it was like, oh man, I am very excited to get into this talk.
Oh,
So,
perfect.
just because you were really like kind of like getting really close to it, so let's just say kind of start with the first question. So, like, what do you sort of say is like, because we're talking about like building a brand for a game. So, I guess what would you give us your like introductory definition for like what that means?
What a brand means for a game, like what building a brand means.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of definitions of this, right? But to me, building a brand for your game means having an identity for your game that could be understood by a player or by a consumer without them needing to have a controller in their hand. So, can they get a quick and concise understanding of what your game is about, what the play experience could be, what feelings they might have, what experiences they might encounter? Can they extrapolate what it means to play your game without actually having to play it? To me, that's what building a brand around your game is.
Oh, that's interesting. You think that
Yeah.
like a strong band requires you to like have an idea without having to play the game?
Yeah, it's like you want to be able to communicate your game's like core appeals, your differentiators without like necessarily needing a demo, right? Like can they discern what this game might make them feel from the way you write a social post or from a piece of key art or from the way your logo is designed.
Interesting. Okay. So what would you say are like the first steps someone's taking? So like let's say, we have some developers of like, working in teams of different sizes, like solo, small team, large companies, mid size.
Mhm.
What are like the first steps they're taking to sort of like build the brand around their game?
Yeah. So first steps, it's always like, as someone who works at a AAA company, I can tell you the process is never the same per game. You think it would be by this point, but it's not. So the first steps are always going to be flexible, but um, understanding your game, in my opinion, requires the game to be a certain amount of percent finished. Um, I've never personally developed a game myself, but I have worked on game jams and indie projects that, I have driven myself. And it's like, I know exactly how much a game can change from concept to like actual, once you're into it, developing it into actually into execution. And if you start building your brand a little bit too early, you might actually not have a good idea of what its core values are just yet. Or for example, your core gameplay loop might change, 45% into development. So that first step, I think, is having a strong enough identity or having enough of your game finished to know, okay, this is really what people are going to be drawing from it. I think the step after that is determining how you want to express it and how it fits in. And this is one I feel like a lot of people miss, how it fits into your quote unquote studio's offerings, right? So if you're an indie team and this is the one game you have, keep in mind when you build your brand for your game and when you build your brand for your studio that you want to build for scale. Is this game going to have a sequel? Is your studio going to release more than one game? Is your studio going to grow? You want to make sure that like you can answer those questions before you build your games brand so that you're not mixing those two things together. If your game takes off and your studio takes off and you haven't like pinholed yourself into an identity. If it's like a medium or a larger team, that step, instead of looking like, okay, let me make sure that I've got a separate identity from my company, that second step might look a little bit more like, okay, um, how is this game going to differentiate from the other games we already have? That's something that is extremely important for, say, Square Enix, where the majority of the titles that we're releasing are JRPGs. Same thing with kind of Atlas too, right? A lot of JRPGs that are kind of competing in the same space. What exactly about this game is going to differentiate it from the other titles in our slate? Or if other titles that you have are extremely different, how can we ensure that this one has an identity that stands apart from other games that people can understand, are like already determined fans can understand why this one has value, even if it might have a different play experience or a different genre than what we usually release. So it's like that initial step is making sure you have enough information to start building your brand. And the second step is to make sure you can answer some of those core questions so you're not tearing yourself up as you build that brand.
Ooh, okay. So, through that explanation, you mentioned that like, like the game needs to be a certain amount done for you to be able to say, cool, this is what the game is going to be. Do you think there's a point when you can be too late in working on your brand?
um, I mean, definitely. I mean, the brand is something that should be like the foundation for your home, right? Like it's the concrete you pour before you build a house. So if you don't have your brand solidified and you start trying to ladder down or tier a bunch of things on top of that, like the house of cards is going to fall if you don't have a strong foundation. So, you definitely don't want to be putting yourself in a position where you're building your brand while you're building executional assets and while you're trying to actually create things. But when you're an indie team, you don't always have that choice, right? You don't always have the opportunity. You wing it. You do whatever you can to make it happen. So, like, I would say on paper, like, definitely there's a time that's quote unquote too late. But we work in game development. We know how it goes.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to have to figure it out.
Okay. Okay. So it's almost like as soon as you have like the ideal sweet spot is like as soon as you have an idea of what your game is going to be, you start working on your brand, and by the time you are trying to like show people the game or like directly market to people, you need to have that brand solidified.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Yeah, as soon as you start knowing that some things about your games are like your game is locked, right? Like, because people, you're going to be finagling very close to launch, probably. I know that even on like, I spent some time supporting Riot, and I know very how close to the line things are messed with before they're released. But
Yeah.
once you've got certain features locked, like I would say, once you know like what your tone of the game is going to be, once you know what that core gameplay loop or what that core gameplay experience is going to be, once you know essentially what the consumer is going to be extrapolating from your game, that's when you can start thinking about your brand or start building your brand. You can think about your brand the entire time you're developing the game, and really you should be. But to actually start building it and putting pen to paper, you just have to have enough locked that is not like there's not going to be core value shifted. So if you've got a game, for example, that you're building that might have a co-op mode to it, do you have to know whether that co-op mode is going to actually make it to the final game in order to build your brand? No, you don't. Because that's a messaging thing, right? That comes in the executional. That's after your brand. You can build your brand once you know the core attitude of your game, quote unquote. But you don't need to know whether you have co-op or not. That's comes after the brand.
Ah, I see what you're saying. So would you say there's any sort of like red flags that you when you see like people like working on like building their brand to present to their consumers? Or is there anything that you're like, hey, maybe you've made some missteps in like your branding around the title?
Um,
I can
yeah.
try rewriting that if that makes sense.
No, I think I'm thinking of an example here. I can talk about this because this is jumping ahead a little bit in our questions that kind of
Yeah.
combining two here. I can speak on this because I did not yet work at the company, so I can as is an opinion I expressed in my interview, so I can
He's just
I
like,
can
it's not
say
my
this.
fault it happened.
Yeah, no, well, it's more so like I'm not digging. I don't think this is the fault of anyone particular. Before I say this, I'm prefacing this. There are definitely, yeah, watch outs. I think like the first part of this, I'll say there are definitely red flags or watch outs in something I've seen in people's one sheets before, for like kind of smaller, like medium or indie teams. A watch out I've seen is people using comparables too much when talking about their brand. And I'm not talking about a company I've worked for here, but I just mean smaller teams. Like if you've got a game that's a farming sim, too often have I seen people say, for example, it's like Stardew Valley, but in space. Okay, yes, great. That's a good way to describe your game. But it's not necessarily a strong branding angle, right? Because you want to give your game a unique identity. And if I can use Stardew Valley as an example again, Stardew Valley is a game that is extremely similar to another to a Japanese franchise that already existed, but they did not, as far as I know, did not use that game at all in their marketing. That's Harvest Moon. Stardew Valley is like a modern repackaging of Harvest Moon, but they didn't really say that. And I believe that's part of the reason Stardew Valley's branding was so strong now. Stardew Valley is synonymous with the concept of a farming sim, even though they didn't create that and they were not the flagship brand for it. Now they are because they had their own identity. And now we've seen this rise of cozy games. And I've seen a lot of one sheet pitches for cozy games that are farming sims that in their summary description talk about other titles. Stardew Valley, for example. And I'm not saying you can't do that. Like in casual conversation, I think that's so important. It's a good quick way to understand, but it shouldn't be like a pillar of your brand. You need to have your own identity. So that's a watch out that I see is don't focus too much on other brands, or other titles, and make sure that you are really honing in on what makes your title unique and valuable. And I'll actually hold the example that I prefaced this for a later question. I know I like
Okay.
built it up, and then everyone's like,
No,
"Huh?" And then I didn't say it, so
no,
I'll
no,
wait.
no, no, no. It's the end of talk spoilers. It's the secret
All right,
after the
building
credits.
suspense.
So I know a lot of your background is in like that sort of like graphic design and social media marketing, and then you kind of like led you to creative like branding and strategy.
Mhm.
Do you think that's I mean, I'm sure that can give people the impression that like this is the sort of work that's like it's just what the marketing people do or the marketer does. Do you think that there's ways that like the development team can sort of like get involved to contribute to the branding process?
Oh, absolutely. I think like the number one thing that I fight for right now as a creative strategist is like context, right? Marketers are not like, I mean, I guess it depends on the team, but marketers are not just like pushing buttons. The whole point of an effective strategy is um, identity, like a unique identity. And it is so important for a marketer, especially in games, to have an understanding of the game that, of course, will never be as deep as an actual developer, but is complex and nuanced, right? So it's like I'm always fighting for story documents. If I'm working on, let me look at the chat, for example. If say I'm working on Paranorma site, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I that's a for those of you that don't know, please play Paranorma Site for one. For two, Paranorma Site is kind of similar to Phoenix, right? It's like a visual novel type game. It's like got some horror basis to it, but it's a lot of dialogue and reading through. I can't, in good conscience, create or make a creative strategy for Paranormicite without understanding the story because that's the core value of this game, right? I need to know the story. I need to know not all of it, but I need to have like when I start work on creative strategy, I read 30 pages of like script, like story summary. I'm looking at character sheets. I'm looking at concept art. Like it is so important for me to understand this game in and out because it's my responsibility to give it an identity that stands out in a world where 40 Steam games are released every single day. Like this is such a competitive industry. So I think something that developers can do is don't be afraid to let marketers in early and don't be afraid to see it as a almost a collaboration. I think a lot of times there's this perception that developers do their job and then the game is done and now it goes to publishing or now it goes to marketing. It can definitely, especially smaller teams, be way more of a collaboration. I think in smaller teams it has to be, right, because people are usually wearing multiple hats, but that collaborative effort, that side by side, that really core and deep understanding is what is going to help those messages get to consumers in a really authentic way. And that also helps further down the line too when you're building community and you're building up a player base and you're creating this world around your game. Like I think that it's, developers are so heads down and they work so hard on these games. They spend so many hours. And the reason that marketers don't do that, the reason that marketers are not also developers always, is so you can have a second perspective, right? You spend so much time building this thing from the inside out. It's a blessing to have another perspective come in. But that perspective's value grows the more they know and the more they can kind of stand next to you and give you a new POV on this thing that you've been grinding and toiling over.
Okay. So I'm just gonna jump to this question just because it's like feel like as you're talking about like branding across teams. Do you think good branding requires like a good budget?
Um, two pronged answer. Uh, no, I don't think that it does. Uh, but two, it helps. And I say it helps obviously because like time is money. I think good branding requires time. And a lot of times time is money. So
Right.
I don't think you need a big budget to put towards it. I think branding could be done by one or two people. I don't think that you need to have like, a $30,000 agency come in and create your brand, but you do need time, to put it together.
Okay. I like that. I definitely like that answer a lot. Have you seen situations maybe on like within Square Enix or just like from talking to like other people in a similar job where a company or a project sort of had to sort of like pivot on their branding or how they were branding the game towards
Ah,
consumers?
yes. Yes. I'm going to talk about this title, and I will not say the name, but I worked on a strategy a few years back for a game um, by a European company. And I was at a large agency at the time. And I was not a lead or a senior, but I had been given lead on this particular project because of a few things that happened with this team. I'll give some backstory. This team is a European team, and they had some issues with gaming press with another title that they had. Not anything because of what the company did, but because one person on this development team was speaking pretty disrespectfully on Twitter regarding some like perceived lack of diversity in the game. And this person, one person in the team, spoke for the team, spoke some views that were not representative of everyone else. And this developer was trying to do some preemptive damage control for this next title they have, kind of preempting a potential response that people in the US might have. So when they came to us, I was assigned to this project, I looked at how they had arranged their branding, and a lot of it was focused around the inclusion of this black character. Um, and I started to kind of look through things. I had been briefed on it. I had been kind of warned about what I was
Yeah.
getting into. But I
Right.
was looking at this branding, and I was looking at their kind of their communication pillars. And a big one was like, we've got this black guy now, and like they're talking about these visuals, like having a trailer focused just for him. And
Sorry, I
I
had
was
to mute
like,
myself. So I was laughing.
yeah, when I tell you, ooh, crazy. It was like I was doing backflips, man. It was nuts. But um I started looking at all this and I said, okay, I understand that you guys are worried about like a PR problem here. I realize that you're sort of trying to adjust and learn from your mistakes, but I need to ask you, how prominent is this character in the actual game? And they're like, well, he's like a wandering NPC that you can run into. And I was like, okay. So he's not like a core character. He's not a playable character. He doesn't have like any sort of quest or anything. And they're like, well, he has like a small quest line that you can run into him. It's like different times you can run. I'm like, okay, you cannot create an entire messaging pillar of your branding based on this character if he's not a core part of the experience. Do you know what I mean? So I that was a very hard pivot because that pivot wasn't challenging to make like technically, right? Like it was an easy adjustment. This was years before the game came out. The game's not even out yet. But what was challenging about it was convincing this team who is European. They have a little bit less experience with sort of diversity inclusion than American teams might. Um, Convincing them of how to reapproach this brand in a way that is respectful, first and foremost, respectful to players and people in general, people of color in general, but also good for their brand. Second, so yes, that's a very specific example, but that is a time that we had to pivot, and it was a lot of work. It didn't affect the development of the game. It just all affected the communication, and it's like some of that also, just as an aside, was unpacking why that character was included in all, and whether it was even a um I don't want to say moral, but whether it was even a even it was if it was even the correct move, like if it was included, if this character was included for the correct reasons, or like it was just a lot of like I had to do like stakeholder interviews, like talk to every dev and talk to every writer and narrative designer and like just interview them essentially to figure out how and why and what to do.
Okay. All right. I stopped laughing. I'm good. All right.
Oh yeah.
Um. So I'm good. I'm good. Okay. Um. So I know there's some games that, like, from the things that you worked on, like, that you would want to point to people to say, like, all right, this game is like a kind of a guiding post you should use. Like, this game has like a strong and recognizable brand. Ideally, things that are like new intellectual property. Like, I know you mentioned Stardew Valley, which is a great example. Do you have any others that you'd like to give us?
Yeah, I do. I think a game that this is going back a little bit, and I had to think about how old this game actually is because in my heart it's still new. Splatoon, I think, has an incredible brand, and Splatoon is actually a game that I like did not think was gonna be dope. Like I saw like Nintendo did a weird thing with Splatoon where they dropped a really short trailer for it during like rest in peace E3 years ago, and it was so short that like I really thought that Splatoon was gonna be like a eShop only drop. Like I thought it because it was only gameplay. They dropped the logo, only gameplay. it just the trailer was confusing. I didn't know what I was looking at. It had all this like raging rock music, and I was like, okay, it's an eShop, multiplayer title trying to push the Wii U, whatever. But the stuff they rolled out after that, Splatoon has like such an unbelievably strong brand that it is like you could study brands that exist within Splatoon and how they are messaged within the world of Splatoon. It's phenomenal. And I'll talk about kind of like why, right? Like Nintendo had this challenge. They wanted to create a competitive shooter in a space that is inherently not like Nintendo's core values inherently go against everything that shooters typically stand for, which is like aggression, competitiveness, like, swearing, racial slurs, like you're gonna get yelled at, like you're gonna be sweaty, like, they're like shooters are aggro. As a former, semi-pro Halo player, shooters are aggro. So it's Nintendo wanted to make a shooter, but had to formulate it in a way that was respectable and could be enjoyed by their younger audience and by their older audience too, but still had that sense of competition that shooters need to hold a community. And what they did with this brand, so like yeah, the story of Splatoon, you don't really need to know it to like look into the brand, but what they really did is like they created a world and they gave this world a purpose beyond the player. Like you are put into a world that has its own like it's kind of similar to The World Ends With You, not to make like a Square Enix reference, but it's got its own fashion trends. It's got its own language style. It's got its own like design acumen. And they took those design concepts that exist in the world of Splatoon and pulled them out of it. So there's different like clothing brands in Splatoon, and they used that logo and that iconography in the way they communicate the brand externally. If you look at like the key art for Splatoon, usually it's done in this really like almost graffiti style, like spray paint way with like these splashes behind it to kind of like represent the ink that you're shooting around. They're using neon colors on black backgrounds. They've got all this attitude in the way that they're designing their like fake language that lives in the game that they'll put in the real world. It doesn't mean anything to like us. It doesn't mean anything to someone who hasn't played Splatoon, but it's got so much attitude to it that you're like, dang, that looks really intentional. I want to know more about like what this world is. And it's like I'm so enamored with Splatoon because of its like and to speak like a nerd here for a second, the first game doesn't really have like it was a Wii U title. Not that many people played it. Um, the first game has like not as much story as you'll find in 2 and 3, but the foundation was there in everything. It was like Split. I imagine Splatoon. Like Nintendo had to have spent 7 years, 6 years building this like world that the universe of Splatoon lived in, and they knew that it was going to grow, and they weren't afraid to put that stuff out there, put that like design acumen into the world without it really making sense first. And I think that is like it like almost like impossible to achieve. Like Splatoon is almost an impossible level of branding. Sorry to like, like nerd out for a second, but I absolutely adore that franchise for that reason.
No, I remember. No, no, no. It's great because it's really interesting because I remember first seeing it at PAX East, and I remember seeing. I'm like, well, this is. I'm interested, but I was like, yo, this is not at all what I expected. I didn't even know what I expected. I just saw it. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm cool. I'm cool to see where this goes, and to see from like it seeming almost like a small side project, like you said. Listen, I'm like, oh, like it's cool. Like, oh, it's an eShop game to push multiplayer. To then like buy Splatoon 3. It's like it's a title to push the Switch.
Oh, it's a whole world. Like people like live and breathe Splatoon, and like something that they did that's like yeah, you're right. It totally pushed the Switch. It was a console seller by that time. And something that like Splatoon did that was so great. It doesn't necessarily tie into branding, but does tie into like community building is like in the older games there was like timed events, right? So like there was only like you could only play like Salmon Run at certain times. And it was kind of like, by restriction it made those times that you play it more valuable, but it also tied the world of Splatoon to the real world. So like you would feel like you're clocking into a shift. You text all your friends like, like Salmon Run's open, like you gotta come. There was a Twitter I used to follow that used to tweet every time Salmon Run opened, and it would reach into my daily life and schedule, and like I don't know, that's so like incredible to me. And they built that, as you said, they built that over time. It started slow and then they expanded and expanded and expanded.
So I guess yeah, like the last thing before we open up the floor to questions from other people, are there anything that you'd like to see more people do in the future when it comes to like building the brand for their games?
Ooh, anything I'd like to see more. Yeah, I think I would love to see more. I would love to see branding teams given more time. I would love to see more collaboration. In terms of the consumer experience, I would love to see more confidence in key art. And I mean specifically for like smaller indie teams. Like it's common to post like character sketches or like sketches of environments, but the confidence to like and it's this is not always algorithmically friendly, but the confidence to be able to put your messaging sometimes in a beautiful design, like that matters. Like a good example I have is like Sky Children of the Light. If you guys follow their social, it's like really personal to the community. And I got to work with Junova Chen and that game company over a few years. And like, I really came to love their approach to art, both in their game and in their marketing. Is it like the absolute most effective thing they could possibly do to generate the most revenue? No, it's not. But it's unique to their title. And that's what makes it so special. And that's what binds their community so strongly is like, they make their messaging beautiful and they make what they say poetic and they do it intentionally. It's not always as fast as it could be. Doesn't give them as much money as it could be, but they lean their niche is art and visuals and like this general like world of creativity and they really lean into that. So I guess have more confidence in your expression and how people express their brand. Don't be afraid to write in a way that's unique. Don't be afraid to use visuals that's unique. Don't feel like you have to hit the quote unquote benchmarks of what other titles in your genre are doing. Like really standing out is not standing out just to be different, but it's what's going to make you stand out is what's authentic to your game. So don't worry so much about what's popular and what's working, and try to do something that is true to your game. That's what I wish I saw more of.
I like that. That is a great way to sort of open up the floor. I like that. So let's go through for questions. Okay, there's people requesting Final Fantasy remakes.
Me too.
All right, got a few people typing. Not a question, or is it really excited? Ooh, okay. So Ian asked, how important are nuanced game mechanics for creative branding?
I think that that's like a tough question, right? Like that depends. There's a lot of factors that affects like creative branding specifically. When I think creative, I'm thinking like messaging and visuals. Nuanced game mechanics aren't always gonna necessarily come through in your visuals. It could come through in your messaging if you feel like it is a core selling point. Sometimes nuanced game mechanics can be tough to express if your campaign isn't long enough to really dive into them. If you feel like it might alienate, I hesitate to even really give advice on this because it's like so dependent on your title. But if you just got to consider what it's going to mean to your audience. Are you speaking to a niche audience who's going to understand? Are you like releasing a top-down tactics game, which is kind of more popular now than it has been in the last 10 years? There's a better opportunity now to talk about top-down tactics gameplay because people have played Persona 5 Tactica. They've played Fire Emblem. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, people did not like Fire Emblem was like niche. So you would need to widen that communication, right? You would need to try to show why Fire Emblem is worth trying to people that have never played a top-down tactics game, which again was a lot more common 20 years ago, people not playing tactics games, than it is now. There's a lot of tactics games. So now you can dive in to those more nuanced gameplay mechanics because you're competing against other titles. That's a core differentiator for you. Before, it was a little bit less about that and more about just explaining a top-down tactics concept at all. I hope that makes sense. So I guess my final answer is it depends, which is not helpful.
Yeah. Her final answer is so like she will send you her freelance marketing her freelance rate.
Yeah, hit me up, hit me up.
Jonathan asks, are there any great guides or examples that break down successful brandings in games recently?
Ooh, guides or examples that break down. Ooh, if there are, I wish I had them. There's always internal stuff, right? Like I'll conduct internal research myself, comparatives, where I'll look at the journey of a game. There's a lot of really good blogs out there too. Like if you just search, like sometimes I'll look at like, a really an example is like sometimes I'll just like look up old like gaming blogs and read consumer reactions to like campaign efforts or branding stuff. Like one I always run into is like this old Halo ARG where they like made this website and did all this stuff. I love like looking at that. Um, I am not aware of any like public guides for game branding that I have referenced. Like yes, I love bees. Wow, good, good knowledge, good brain. Yeah, good brain, Jonathan. Good memory too.
Good knowledge.
Yeah, good knowledge. I guess my answer is like not that I'm like aware of. Like I don't. There's not like a place I typically go to. I'm usually formulating that stuff myself. But you know what I like to do though, Jonathan, if I need some inspo or if I want to look at stuff, I'll go look at old E3s or old directs or old like Sony, what are they called? Sony Play? I can't remember what the Sony ones are called. I'll go look at old like shows like that from like, like maybe 5 or 6 or 10 years ago. I'll go look at those to see how games were announced or how games were messaged out, especially games that I already know exist now, because then I have the opportunity. I have like the gift of force or of foresight,
Hindsight.
right? Like I can go back and watch them 10 years ago, and I know how it ended up now, so I can kind of like formulate in my brain
Oh,
and
I
look
see.
over time how they evolved that brand.
I see. Yeah, okay. Because it's like, if it's a recent title, you don't really have the understanding of like where it's gonna end up. Whereas like,
Yeah,
ooh, that's
exactly.
clever, like that. That's good. Nigel. Ooh, okay. How much should a indie studio of 5 to 20 people budget for branding and marketing versus a, let's say, like a mid-sized team?
What should an indie studio, 5 to 20 people, budget for a branding marketer versus? Boy, howdy, that's like I don't know if I can answer that. Um,
A
it,
lot.
I know that's like that hard and fast knowledge you go to GDC for, right?
Yeah.
Um, God, I guess it depends. It's like you got to look at your competitors, right? Like something I recommend to smaller teams is make a white space map. So make like a grid, like an X and Y axis, and put some things on that axis, right? So put maybe on the top it's like stick gameplay. Left it's like good narrative. Like on the right it's like affordable cost or something like that. The bottom is like, I don't know, game length. And you could start putting competitors in your genre on that white space map and then place your game on there. And that will kind of give you an idea of who you're up against. How much like share of mind you're competing against, and like look at games that are kind of like popular at the time or might be popular around the time you're releasing. That can kind of help you determine like how much money you need to put towards marketing. That's like a good way to determine like campaign spend, like how much you're going to be fighting for attention, like what shows you're going to have to jump into, who you're going to have to be kind of like entering the ring against. Budget for branding, that's like so hard to say, cuz like like if you've got a like let's say visual novel game and all of your game is like art, all of it's art, static art, like you might not have to theoretically you might not have to spend as much on branding because you've got assets already, you've got stuff that you can use, like, whatever. If you've got like a 3D behind the back like shooter game, like you can't pull like 3D assets as much and like create like statics from that. You're gonna have to pose models, you're gonna have to like move through, like you're gonna have to get some capture art, some like, I don't know, it's like hard to say. Like it's depending on, like, it's a balance between like where you're going to be communicating, how much you're going to be communicating, and what you got to do to make that communication. So I can't like give you a number. I could like maybe give you a percentage if you wanted to like reach out to me and we could talk about it. But I can't say a blanket statement in confidence. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. You can hit her up on her for her freelance work, and then she can give you more details.
I'm sorry about that. I see the follow-up question actually. Where should we focus that smaller budget for maximum impact? Um, competitive placement is probably what I would say. I would say having a strong logo is super important, extremely important. Having a strong brand kit is really important. Even if you have an indie game, so just having like having a set of backgrounds that you can lean on is an example. Like if you're gonna have somebody making social graphics, make sure they've got like 4 brand approved backgrounds that they could like use in all social ads to make sure that everything stays consistent. Like having a strong brand kit, fonts you're gonna use, colors you're gonna use, backgrounds you're gonna use. That is something I would always put budget towards. Logo is something I'd always put budget towards. If we're talking just creative branding, and make sure that whoever's handling your branding is a good writer.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I can address the Square Enix tactics
Don't do it.
question.
Nope, nope.
No,
Non-disclosure
I'll do it.
agreement. No.
I don't
Don't let him get
care.
you fired.
Yeah, fire me. I don't care. No. Um, I'm just curious. Since you brought up tactics games, you work at Square. Can you kill the rumors that FFT remasters in the works? Kill it now, please. I check the trademark database registry every 5 minutes. I know you guys aren't thinking about FFT. That picture is so funny. Um, I don't know. I have no idea. But I'll say if you like tactics, get on Twitter and talk about it. That's what I'll say. If you like it, talk about it.
Let me just
Period.
do one last roll for questions. All right, so I think that's it. Angel, thank you so much for doing this. You were a fantastic speaker. I definitely learned a ton from this.
Yay! I really do hope it was helpful. I'm sorry I couldn't answer some of the more direct questions, but I really appreciate you having me on and thinking of me at all. It means a lot.
No, this was great. So everyone else, as always, thank you for coming. I personally really appreciate when like you all always stop by and say like, "Yo, we've got someone like someone from our community coming to like share the knowledge." So I always appreciate you all always stopping by to like participate. Um, there will usually be some of us hanging out in the chat and field center afterwards, but at this point, this is it. So everyone have a good evening. Right,
Yay! Thanks for being
and
here.